Right, so welcome back. We are back on the V8. Loom has arrived from Renars. I'll drop his details in the description, so if you need a V8 Loom adapted for E36, he can sort you out. But yeah, so that's the plan for this episode, is put on the adapted Loom and hopefully it swings over. There's no crank sensor on the car, so we need to order one. But providing it swings over off the new Loom from the key, there's no issues there. I'll order a crank sensor then, and fingers crossed, set up all the fuel system, everything like that, and get everything plumbed in and get started. So that's the plan. So this is the M62b44 non-vanus Loom, modified to make it plug and play on the E36. I'll drop a link to the guy who made this for us. His name is Renars Luis. I'll drop a link in the description just to show you if you need to get one of these made. Costs 350 quid. Doesn't seem too bad. I'm going to get it all plugged in now and hopefully it works. Right, so the Loom is all on, well, everywhere it needs to be. There's a few wires not connected, just like the MAF crank sensor, because we need a crank sensor. We definitely have fuel. Fuel is coming out of the pipes and I turned the ignition on, so I've taken a fuse out, put some oil back in it again because there was a slight leak last time and it leaked all over the floor. Hopefully I fixed that. So next on the list is try turn it over. Starter's firing out, but not turning over. So I'll have a quick look at that and see what the issue is and come back to you. So currently jacked up, starter removed. Yeah, I had to take the starter off because the solenoid is dead, so I need a new solenoid for the starter. Hopefully you can get the old solenoid off the old one because the screws that hold the solenoid in are rusted and solid. So try an impact driver on that, see if we can get them off, swap the solenoid. Fingers crossed then it should turn over. It's just the starter is just firing out, but not turning over and get the swing over if I put direct power to the starter, but not if I put power to the small 10mm terminal. Yeah, so that's a pain in the arse. It's not too bad taking the starter off. There's a lot of access to where it is underneath. It's just a pain in the arse having to jack the car up. So yeah, so that's the next plan. Obviously tiny bit of a setback, but these things are expected when building stuff like this, especially with a starter that's been sitting there for a long time. We don't have any other starters that are the same as this one, so hopefully we can swap the solenoid. We've got spare solenoids, so hopefully we can swap the solenoid and that'll work. As I said earlier, we have fuel, so once the starter's on, we'll have fuel and obviously a starter. Need the crank sensor, which we're going to sort out. So yeah, fingers crossed once we get a starter, connect up once the solenoid is done, crank sensor, I'll connect up the fuel lines. Yeah, so fingers crossed we'll be making quite a bit of progress on it. Once it starts, it's just some fab work and stuff like that, making the exhaust and finishing off a few bits. But yeah, once it starts, that's our main goal, getting it running. We will probably need a custom prop as well, so it can drive, but we'll get around to that once we've got the engine running. So yeah, so stick with us. We have the box of starters. Tried the solenoids off them, but no luck. They won't fit the V8 starter. They're all E36 starters and the bolt pattern on the solenoids is slightly off. So got a new starter. So we're going to fit that, and fingers crossed it should turn over off the key. We have fuel. As I said before, I haven't got a crank sensor, so I need to order one of them. Tried our local motor factors this morning, but they don't do them, so it's probably BMW only. So we'll ring BMW, get one, but in the meantime I'll probably try to get the fuel lines and that hooked up, so once a crank sensor comes, fingers crossed it starts. Yeah, so that's what we're doing at the moment. So next I'm going to get back under it and fit the starter. As you can see, it's jacked up in the corner. Ramp is being used as always. So just in between working on other cars, I get to do a little bit on this. Yeah, fingers crossed. Once the starter's in, it turns over, get a crank sensor, fuel lines hooked up, engine's running, and then we can get on with the rest of the fabrication, sort out the prop shaft, exhaust. We've done the manifolds, we've done driver's side. Passenger side isn't as bad, so we just need to finish off passenger side manifold. We can start making an exhaust, get the oil, filter housing mounted, stuff like that, get a radiator on it. Basically just get it all plumbed in and get it done. Right, so it turns over from the key. Just need to hook up the fuel lines and get a crank sensor. And fingers crossed this should start. So they're the next two things on the list to get done. I have to order a crank sensor, as I said. Have to ring BMW and get one ordered. Yeah, so happy days, bit more progress. Fingers crossed it'll start next time. So the final part of the puzzle for this car has come, well, to get it running anyway. Crank sensor just arrived from BMW. Hopefully fit this and fingers crossed it should start. So this is where the crank sensor goes into this little adapter that comes with the PNC adapter plate, because obviously on an M62 the crank sensor would normally be in the gearbox, and we obviously don't have a gearbox for this engine. We're using the M57 gearbox, so we just had to cut a slot out and add this little bracket on, and the crank sensor just bolts in with this Allen key. Holes and everything already drilled in place for this, so everything should fit. And I grab the crank sensor. There you go, so it fits in place. That's always a good sign. So just lift these up now and make sure they're tight. Nice and tight, and then the last bit is the crank sensor plug, wherever that is. It must be stuck up there. crank sensor plug on. So technically fuel lines are connected. We had fuel the other day when we turned the ignition on, so fuel pump is working, crank sensors in place, car turns over by the key, fingers crossed it starts. Yes! Yes!
That was loud.
Fucking yes, that's loud, but yes!
That was loud.
You don't know how that makes me very happy.
That was loud.
Ah, fucking hell. I've never wanted an engine to run as much as that. Fuel lines, I don't know how it sounds.
Smell awfully filthy.
Fuel don't smell great, does it?
No.
So she runs at long last. Now we can get on with them finishing it off, and you'll see it on track soon, hopefully. Very happy.